The New York Times opinion editor and writer Bari Weiss has canceled herself, quitting her job at the New York Times because she no longer feels welcome at the paper. Real sad stuff. Now, I'm going to get to her public letter discussing this. Of course, you know, publishing something like this to get as much attention as possible before leaving. This is what they do. There's some speculation that she's going to be starting a new website with some other people, some other conservatives. Okay, whatever. But I want to get to some points in this letter, and it is hilarious. It really is. The view that Bari Weiss has on what left, right, center, or conservative centrist is compared to reality, objective reality, is completely out of whack. And I'm going to have some examples here as well in terms of how, or who's actually been canceled over the past 50 years. And it's not the centrists, it's not conservatives. So here Bari Weiss starts. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm not going to put you through that. But here she starts saying, it is with sadness that I write to tell you that I am resigning from the New York Times. I was hired with the goal of bringing in voices that would not otherwise appear in your pages. First-time writers, centrists, conservatives. Wait, let me just stop there. That would not otherwise appear in your pages. Centrists, conservatives, and others who would not naturally think of the Times as their home. Is this a joke? So throughout this letter, it's obvious Bari Weiss views left, right, center, or politics in general. She views it as a reflection of Congress, as opposed to looking at objective reality. So you see how far right Congress has gone over the past 40 years. It is obvious where the discussion is. So if you are viewing politics, viewing the New York Times as it should be a reflection of Congress, then you may think some of what she says makes sense. Because how many pro-Trumpers are there at the New York Times? I don't imagine there are many. But if you view it in terms of objective reality, looking at the socioeconomic conditions, how most people actually experience and live their lives, there is no real analysis in the New York Times from socialists, let alone communists. In terms of who is actually silenced in mainstream media, it's people on the left. If you look at an actual spectrum of left to right, there are communists and socialists that have no home at all in mainstream media. Yet no, people in the center and conservatives silenced by the paper. Are you joking? Now, actually, let me go off on this in terms of a few examples here. So, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky is one of our most important public intellectuals. He wrote Manufacturing Consent, a scathing critique of mainstream media and how the propaganda model essentially brainwashes people into complacency. Where is Noam Chomsky in the mainstream media? Is he on MSNBC, CNN? Is he in this paper? Like, this is the actual canceling. This is the actual silencing of the left. The left has been silenced for 50 years. I discussed this as well in my video on that cancel culture letter. The left has actually been silenced. More examples. The discussion of war and foreign policy. When it comes to war and foreign policy, who is actually propped up in mainstream media? If you read these papers at all, if you watch cable news at all, it is the military-industrial complex. There is favoritism towards neocons and the military-industrial complex. Former George Bush officials, they're the ones commenting on foreign policy and war in the mainstream press. So, who is actually being silenced there? You look at the Iraq War in particular. The only publication to get it right is Knight Ridder, who no one even knows, and then McClatchy bought them up. So Knight Ridder and McClatchy, they got the Iraq War right. Everyone else got it wrong. And the voices that were speaking out against the Iraq War were silenced and also fired. So let me give you an actual example here. Phil Donahue lost in 2003, got fired from MSNBC when he came out against the Iraq War.
Well, I think what happened to me, the biggest lesson, I think, is how corporate media shapes our opinions and our coverage. This was a decision, my decision, the decision to release me, came from far above. This was not an assistant program director who decided to separate me from MSNBC. They were terrified of the anti-war voice, and that is not an overstatement. Anti-war voices were not popular. And if you're General Electric, you certainly don't want an anti-war voice on a cable channel that you own. Donald Rumsfeld's your biggest customer. So, by the way, I had to have two conservatives on for every liberal. I could have Richard Pearl on alone, but I couldn't have Dennis Kucinich on alone. I was considered two liberals.
Phil Donahue lost his job at MSNBC despite incredible ratings at the time because he was against the Iraq War. Now, maybe you think, oh, that's just one single this has never happened before. This never happens. It's just one rare instance where somebody on the left was fired. Nope, actually, here's Jesse Ventura talking about how he lost his hosting gig at MSNBC.
You had to deal with MSNBC at
right
one
out
point.
of came out of office in 2003. I was the hottest commodity out there. Fox, MSNBC, and CNN got in a bidding war for me. MSNBC won. I signed a 3-year contract with them. I was supposed to be on 5 nights a week, but there was a problem. After I signed the contract, we were putting the whole show together. It came out that I opposed the Iraq War. Well, at the same time, they had just hired Phil Donahue. Phil was their highest rated show. He also opposed the Iraq War. Phil got pulled from the air, and I was never allowed on, basically.
So I want people
and they paid me for the whole 3 years, so I was handcuffed by their contract. I couldn't do any news shows, couldn't do any other network, and they paid the entire 3 years. It's the easiest money I've ever made, but they, in essence, censored me because I honor contracts, and, you know, as long as they paid me, they owned me.
Yeah.
So there's someone else who was canceled by corporate media. I find it hilarious that cancel culture is only ever discussed when it's talked about the reactions from people online. Which, look, I'm not saying that doesn't exist. Yes, that exists. You know, professors shouldn't be fired because they said something that was out of line with how their students felt about it. Yeah, I'm on board. But look who's been canceled for the past 50 years. The left has been completely silenced, cut out of the conversation. Where are the anti-war voices in the mainstream press, cable news? Where are the socialists? Where are the communists? That's the actual left. They get no representation. Now, I will say there's one that I can even think of. Elizabeth Bruenig. Elizabeth Bruenig is a Democratic socialist, works for the New York Times. That's all I know. Maybe there are more. But go, try and look for not even just the writers, but just the pieces in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, on MSNBC, on CNN, that are discussing how awesome or the great ideas coming out of socialism and communism. Go, try. Who's actually been silenced? Now, let's get back to the letter. So Bari Weiss goes on here to say, my work and my character are openly demeaned on company-wide Slack channels, where masthead editors regularly weigh in. There, some coworkers insist I need to be rooted out if this company is to be a truly inclusive one, while others post axe emojis next to my name. Still, other New York Times employees publicly smear me as a liar and a bigot on Twitter, with no fear that harassing me will be met with appropriate action. They never are. Here, Bari Weiss is unhappy that the people criticizing her are not being fired. In the same letter where she's discussing how horrible cancel culture is. The hypocrisy is so thick, it's smacking me in the damn face. This is completely ridiculous. How does she not see it herself? How does she not see what she is saying? I mean, it truly is remarkable. More here. Part of me wishes I could say that my experience was unique, but the truth is that intellectual curiosity, let alone risk-taking, is now a liability at the Times. Why edit something challenging to our readers or write something bold, only to go through the numbing process of making it ideologically kosher, when we can assure ourselves of job security and clicks by publishing our 4,000th op-ed arguing that Donald Trump is a unique danger to the country and the world. And so, self-censorship has become the norm. Now, this point is not wrong. Yes, that's what the New York Times does. They publish 4,000 plus op-eds arguing Donald Trump is a unique danger. Yes, they do that all the time. I agree. But her critique here is that, the real issue is, like, her view on this is that, oh, those are progressives writing those op-eds. That's the center. That's, in many cases, actual conservatives writing those pieces. The left, socialists, democratic socialists, they have an actual critique of the system that led to Donald Trump. If you listen to actual left-wing voices, they will tell you Donald Trump is not the problem. He is simply a symptom of the problem. That he was born out of the socioeconomic conditions that already exist. That if he didn't come along, somebody else like him would have come along. But that is not the critique Bari Weiss has here. The critique is that, oh, need more, intellectual conservatives and centrists. So this is, I think there's a little more here. Here we go. The paper of record is, more and more, the record of those living in a distant galaxy. One whose concerns are profoundly removed from the lives of most people. Now, I read that mockingly, but that's correct. That's correct. But again, what is her actual criticism here? Is her criticism that the New York Times isn't talking about, how critiques from the left of the system, of how capitalism has led to the lives that people live, and the incredible inequality in the American system, the lack of a universal healthcare system. I mean, go down the list. The kind of student debt that students are saddled with at the very beginning of their lives. Is that her critique? Or is her critique the one from the beginning that she wanted to bring more conservatives and centrists to the New York Times? So this is where her entire worldview is twisted around essentially the politics of Congress, as opposed to the politics that affect the lives of real people every day, and how that discussion has been co-opted by massive corporations. That is the actual issue here. The power that corporations have over speech. But that isn't her problem. So this is, and here, let me give you some reactions here. Alex Koch tweets out, Bari Weiss quit her cushy job at the New York Times so she could more openly align with her pals on the far right. So guess who loves this letter right now? Donald Trump Jr. It's a must-read for everyone. Ted Cruz, Ben Shapiro, Tom Cotton. Now, look, obviously there are people, like Andrew Yang, for example, also loves the letter. But these are people that are largely, like, with them, with conservatives, their agenda. But people like Andrew Yang, they're just misinformed. They're uninformed. They're not really aware of the actual divide in media and what the actual issue is with corporations having all the power over speech and what gets published. So their critique is just, it's largely ignorant. But you see here, conservatives loving this letter. Sam Stein here says, seeing a lot of folks saying Bari Weiss's resignation exposes the roots of the demise of American journalism, I'd suggest that hedge funds buying and ripping apart outlets across the country and massive tech giants sucking up all the ad revenue are more important matters. Agreed 100%. Last one here, current affairs. The funny thing is that Bari Weiss so obviously wanted the New York Times to cancel her so she could prove they were censorious social justice warriors. But instead, they kept printing her articles and people just mocked them. So her only option to feign persecution was to self-cancel. And that's it. So this is the point of doing something like this. Bari Weiss wanted to, if she wasn't going to be fired for her absurdity, I guess, for lack of a better term here. If she wasn't going to be fired, then she was going to fire herself and do it for clicks and carry all of that media attention into a new venture, which we all expect to come probably in the next few weeks. So that was the actual purpose of all of this. But understand how completely backwards Bari Weiss and her analysis of the media actually is.